Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says the U.S. is the only country that can stop Israel from attacking Rafah, the southern Gaza city where more than 1 million people are taking refuge. Mr. Abbas, who runs parts of the occupied West Bank, said any attack could see Palestinians flee Gaza. Israel has consistently vowed to carry out an offensive in Rafah. U.S. President Joe Biden reiterated his clear position on Rafah to Israel. PM Benjamin Netanyahu, in a call on Sunday, the U.S. has repeatedly said it cannot support a large-scale Israeli military operation in Rafah without seeing a credible plan to keep civilians out of harm's way. Speaking at the World Economic Forum, in the Saudi capital Riyadh earlier, Mr. Abbas, whose Palestinian Authority is not present in Gaza, which has been under Hamas rule since 2007, urged the U.S. to intervene. We appeal to the United States of America to ask Israel to stop the Rafah operation because America is the only country capable of preventing Israel from committing this crime, he said. What will happen in the coming few days is what Israel will do with attacking Rafah because all the Palestinians from Gaza are gathered there. He added that only a small strike on Rafah would force the Palestinian population to flee the Gaza Strip. The biggest catastrophe in the Palestinian people's history would then happen. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has consistently vowed to carry out an offensive in Rafah as a next step in military actions against Hamas. But on Saturday, Israel's foreign minister said Israel could suspend the incursion if there was a hostage deal. The release of the hostages is the top priority for us, Israel Katz said. Long-running talks mediated by Egypt and Qatar have largely stalled because of the gaps between the Israeli and Hamas positions. But on Sunday, Hamas said it would send representatives to Cairo to give a response to the latest proposal. Hamas wants a permanent end to the war and withdrawal of all Israeli troops from Gaza, while Israel insists Hamas must be destroyed in Gaza and all hostages freed. Egypt and other Arab states have previously said an influx of Palestinian refugees fleeing the war would be unacceptable because it would amount to the expulsion of Palestinians from their land. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to arrive in Riyadh later on Sunday and hold talks with Mr. Abbas. Earlier, White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told ABC that Israel had agreed to listen to U.S. concerns and thoughts before going into Rafah. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said its chief Herzi Halevi had approved plans to continue the war, with Israeli media saying this referred to the Rafah operation. More than half of Gaza's population is in Rafah, and conditions in the overcrowded southern city are already dire, with displaced people there telling the BBC there was a lack of food, water, and medication. Satellite pictures have shown new tent encampments being built near the Gaza coast, to the west of Rafah, and the city of Khan Yunis, slightly further north, which has been left largely in ruins. Media reports say the tents are to accommodate people displaced from Rafah. The current war began when Hamas attacked Israeli communities near Gaza, killing about 1,200 people, mainly civilians, and taking about 250 hostages. Israel's subsequent campaign of aerial bombardment, and ground operations in Gaza has killed 34,454 people, mostly civilians, according to the Hamas-run health ministry there. Over the 6 months of war, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, have entered and taken control of all of northern Gaza, including Gaza City, and most of central and southern Gaza, including Khan Yunis. They have since withdrawn from almost all of those areas, but troops remain stationed on a road Israel has built that separates northern and southern Gaza. However, Palestinians displaced to southern Gaza, where the Israeli military told them to go for their own safety earlier in the war, have been unable to return to homes further north, a key demand Hamas is making in ceasefire talks, and Israel has given no indication when they will be allowed to. Meanwhile, deadly Israeli bombardment has continued across Gaza, including in Rafah, with the Israeli military saying it has been striking launch sites for projectiles. U.S. media have quoted unnamed Egyptian officials as saying the latest ceasefire proposal given to Hamas involved a several-week period of calm intended to lead to the end of the war in return for the release of 20 hostages. This week, Hamas's armed wing released 2 videos showing the first proof of life of 3 hostages since they were abducted last October. In undated footage filmed under duress, Omri Moran said he had been held for 202 days, and Keith Siegel mentioned the recent Passover holiday, indicating the clips were filmed recently. It follows another proof-of-life video the group released earlier this week, showing Israeli-American hostage Hirsch Goldberg Poland, 23, who is shown without his lower left arm in the short clip. It was blown off during Hamas's 7th October attack. Some 133 hostages are believed still to be in Gaza, of whom about 30 are thought to be dead, after a brief truce in November saw some hostages released.
Campaigners and community members living near an ancient bluebell woodland in Kent say it has been turned into a desolate wasteland, buried under uncleared, illegally dumped waste. A petition signed by more than 6,500 people is calling for an immediate cleanup of Hodes Wood near Ashford. In January, the Environment Agency, EA, closed down the site to try and prevent further waste tipping. Ashford Borough Council also said it was also investigating reports of an odor nuisance. Hodes Wood is a protected site of special scientific interest, SSSI, and an area of outstanding natural beauty, which ought to be carpeted in bluebells at this time of year. But instead, huge swathes of the woodland is buried in waste tens of feet deep. The petition follows an open letter written earlier this month to the Environment Secretary Steve Barclay by 6 organizations calling for support and funding to clear the site, which began seeing issues with waste being dumped there in 2020. The Rescue Hodes Wood campaign group said community members would see as many as 20 to 30 trucks per day dumping waste at the woods at the height of the problem in July 2023. Some residents fear toxic liquid from the site could end up in the river and have reported a nasty, rotting egg smell coming from the waste. A spokesperson for Rescue Hodes Wood said, "I've even smelled it from my bedroom on one occasion. It's a feeling of being poisoned. And the only way when it's here you can escape it is by leaving your property and leaving the area completely." A spokesman for Ashford Borough Council said to date it had been unable to establish that the issues have crossed the threshold of a statutory nuisance, but that it continued to liaise with the relevant agencies, including Natural England and the EA. The EA reiterated that it was continuing its investigations into illegal fly tipping at the site and was determined to keep one step ahead of criminals. In January, when the EA closed the site, Kent Police's Rural Task Force said, "Fly tipping is often linked to other forms of criminality, and we are therefore assisting the Environment Agency and other partner agencies with their investigation and associated enforcement action." It also described the size and quantity of waste as shocking and totally irresponsible. The U.S. doctor who cannot forget what he saw in Gaza. Sam Attar reckons he left part of his soul in Gaza. It was the part of him that saw suffering and could not turn away, the part which now cannot forget. You can be on the shores of Lake Michigan on an overcast spring day, the wind whipping up waves on the green water, and at the very same time you can be back there in the heat and the dying. It's been 3 weeks since he came home to Chicago, but it might as well have been yesterday. The faces of that other world are with him. Jenna, the traumatized little girl wasting away, spectral pale on a hospital bed, while her mother shows Sam a phone video of the child's last birthday. Happy days before the disaster. Another mother whose 10-year-old son had just died. The mom just told me with just a blank, numb stare on her face that he had just died 5 minutes prior. The staff had been trying to cover up his body with blankets, but she just refused to let them. She wanted to spend more time with him. She was grieving. She was sobbing, and stayed that way for about a good 20 minutes. She just didn't want to leave his side. Then there was the man in his 50s, forgotten in a room, having had both legs amputated. He had lost his kids, his grandkids, his home, Sam recalls, and he's alone in the corner of this dark hospital, maggots going out of his wounds, and he was screaming, "The worms are eating me alive. Please help me." That was just one out of, I don't know, I stopped counting. But those are the people I still think of because they're still there. Sam is a sensitive, thoughtful man in his 40s, the son of 2 doctors who was born and raised in Chicago and who works as a surgeon at Northwestern Hospital in the city. While in Gaza, he kept video diaries and filmed his experiences. For 2 weeks in March and April, on behalf of the NGO Palestinian American Bridge, he worked in Gaza hospitals that were desperately short of everything except badly wounded patients. On the day he entered Gaza this time around, he was immediately confronted with the hunger crisis. Sam recounts his experiences calmly, as you might expect of a man trained to put patients at ease. Every day there was the relentless pressure of carrying out triage, deciding who could be saved, who was beyond hope. Patients lying on hospital floors surrounded by blood and discarded bandages, the air filled with the cries of pain and of grieving relatives. There is no erasing such horrors. Even if you are a highly trained doctor with past experience of war zones like Ukraine, Syria, and Iraq. I still think of all the patients I took care of, he says, all the doctors that are still there. There's a little bit of guilt and shame at leaving because there's so much that needs to be done. The needs are overwhelming, and you walk away from people that are still there and still suffering. The last trip, his third into Gaza since the war began, saw him join the first team of international medics to be embedded in a hospital in northern Gaza where malnutrition is at its most acute. The mission was organized by the World Health Organization, WHO, which has warned of looming famine. Some 30% of children below the age of 2 are reported to be acutely malnourished, and 70% of the population in northern Gaza is facing what the UN calls catastrophic hunger. Last month, the UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, accused Israel of a potential war crime because of the food crisis in Gaza. Sam Attar remembers the 32-year-old woman admitted suffering from severe malnutrition with her son and her mother and father in the room with her. I had to call it, Sam says. The young mother lay on a bench, her left arm dangling towards the floor, eyes gazing upward in the moment of death. Across the room, a nurse comforted her crying mother. There was the little girl, Jenna Ayad, aged 7, just skeleton and bone, whose mother hoped to get to the south where better medical facilities were available. Jenna was traumatized by the war and looked to be extremely malnourished. She suffers from cystic fibrosis, which makes digestion more difficult. Her condition has been exacerbated by the conditions of the war, and she is also suffering from trauma. In footage taken by a BBC cameraman, Jenna seems lost and now only speaks to her mother. "What can I do? She can't be treated," said Nisma Ayad. Her mental state is very difficult. She doesn't talk at all whenever anyone talks to her. Her situation is bad, and as a mom, I can't do anything. Dr. Attar said that as his team packed up to return to southern Gaza, Jenna's mother approached him. Jenna's mom came to me and was saying, "I thought we were coming with you. What's happening? Why are you going and we're staying?" Sam had to explain that the convoy south was only approved for the delivery of fuel and food and not for carrying patients. But before leaving, Sam and his colleagues filled in the necessary papers to have Jenna transferred. It would take days, but they would make sure the paperwork reached the right offices. When Sam went to speak with Jenna's mother, other mums noticed. The problem is it's open, shared rooms with maybe 10 patients in one room. So when all the other moms saw me talking to her, they all swarmed me. Jenna was transferred and is now being treated at the International Medical Corps Hospital near Rafah. According to UN estimates, last month, the majority of those killed in the war have been women and children. 13,000 children, 9,000 women. The war is now in its 7th month. Negotiations for a ceasefire and the release of hostages are stalled. Every day and night, the wounded and the malnourished arrive at the few functioning hospitals that are left. The WHO says that only 10 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are still functioning. Traveling in Gaza can be very dangerous for aid workers. Witness the deaths of 7 aid workers, including 3 Britons, when the Israeli military attacked their convoy with missile strikes on 1st of April. Sam describes queuing for hours at Israeli checkpoints. We often wait 1 to 4 hours, depending on how long it takes for the Israelis to approve the passage, because they are conducting military operations. The U.S. doctor wants to see a concerted push to get more aid into the north. The north just needs more access. It needs more food, more fuel, more water. The roads need to be opened. And there are so many patients that need to be evacuated from the north to the south. And the problem is the south is also busy. I mean, the